Millions of people take to the streets in Moscow and across Russia as the country celebrates 70 years since victory over the Nazis. And we are bringing you our special coverage from our studio in the heart of Moscow, including highlights of the trademark and spectacular Red Square parade.
Великой Отечественной войны. На марше пехотинцы со знаменитыми винтовками Мосина. Всю тяжесть первых боев они вынесли на своих плечах.
Also this hour, David Cameron puts together his new cabinet after a stunning Conservative Party victory in Britain's general election, which defied forecasts of a hung parliament. And the number of Americans renouncing their citizenship hits an all-time high, despite the government trying to stop the trend. Hello there, warm welcome to RT International. You're with me, Katie Bilby. 70 years ago, Russians awoke to the glorious news. The Nazis had surrendered and the deadliest war Europe had ever seen was over. We're following the celebrations across Russia with our special anniversary coverage. Out of the 60 million people who died in the war, it's estimated that up to 27 million, almost half, were Soviet citizens. Most Russian families were scarred by the conflict. And here you can see the pictures of those who fought for freedom. And every single one of them is a relative of someone who works here at RT. It's a grand day of remembrance and celebration for the whole country, with the biggest events being held right here in the capital. Well, let's cross over to Rory Souchet, who's in the special studio in the heart of Moscow. Hello, Rory.
Katie, thanks very much indeed for that. Indeed, we are at our special RT International studio with the Kremlin just over my shoulder here. And a very warm welcome to you if you're just joining us. It's been, well, one fantastic parade, the 70th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany being commemorated here in downtown central Moscow. Now, to remember those who fought and are no longer with us, an event called the Immortal Regiment March has been held here in Moscow and other parts of the world as well. In fact, in the Russian capital here, the numbers have gone up and up and up. They've started at about 150 to 200,000, 300,000. Now at least 350,000 people are taking part in this march here. Many carrying photographs of their relatives who took part in or were affected by the war. The Immortal Regiment event aims to preserve the memory of the fallen from all families. In fact, RT's Yegor Piskunov continues to follow the march live for us and can join us here on our special coverage. As Yegor, good to see you downtown again. The numbers get higher and higher. What can you tell us?
Absolutely, Rory. This is definitely one of the most impressive events throughout this entire day. I mean, the military parade was the biggest, one of the biggest ones Moscow has seen in years, if ever. And it was great and amazing, but we saw the recitals, we knew what to expect. Here, we're seeing, and we've been seeing for the past few hours, scores and scores of people just marching through the main street of the city, Tverskaya Street, and onto Red Square. You can see it behind me over there, all these colors and all these people, like up to 350,000 by now, which is much more than expected. They're all carrying pictures of those who fought in the war but didn't live up to this day to mark this anniversary, the 70th anniversary since the defeat of Nazi Germany. It's really people of all ages, from ordinary citizens to senior officials. And at some point, Vladimir Putin joined the crowd as well on Red Square, carrying the picture of his own father, who fought in the war, made it through the war from day one up until the very last fired shot.
I think that my father, just like millions and millions of ordinary soldiers, deserved the right to walk through this square. But not everyone had the chance to walk on Red Square. And I'm so happy that my father, whose portrait I'm holding right now in my hands, as well as thousands of other people's relatives, the war workers, can now be seen on Red Square, albeit just in photos carried by their relatives. But they deserve it.
And like you said, Rory, this movement is called the Immortal Regiment. Its aim is to commemorate those who fought in the war but didn't live up to this day, to celebrate this latest anniversary. And similar rallies have been taking place across the whole country and in other cities across the world as well. Of course, not as massive as this one, but like I said, even us here in Moscow didn't expect it to be that big. But of course, still, even this enormous event is still only a part of the grand celebrations that we've been seeing throughout the day here, and that are going to continue up until the end of the day.
Yeah, indeed, Yegor, the Immortal Regiment March continues. Yegor, thank you very much for that. I just want to speak to the viewer and explain that ultimately several hours have passed now since the Immortal Regiment March began at 2 p.m. Moscow time. That's over 3 hours ago now. People continue to pour onto the streets. As we pan the camera just over my right shoulder here, we'll continue to show you these live pictures here. As we were saying, upwards of 350,000 people in attendance carrying photographs of their loved ones or family veterans who were affected or who died in the Great Patriotic War, also known as World War II. And it's interestingly enough, as we continue our live coverage here on RT International, working our way all the way up until the fireworks this evening that should be in about 4.5–5 hours time, it's expected, or suspected I should say, that this march of the Immortal Regiment will still be going at that point. So do stay with us for this continued live coverage here. Now, not only Russians joined the huge march in Moscow, as Yegor Piskunov was saying, many foreigners were among them. In fact, RT's Anna Julia Hedges met one of them.
I'm now walking into Red Square along with the so-called Immortal Regiment. Along here with me are the people carrying the portraits of their loved ones who fought during the Great Patriotic War but sadly are no longer with us. I'm now here with John Lockland, who is from the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation in Paris. Mr. Lockland, could you tell me why are you here today?
Well, I grew up very much with the memory of the war as part of my childhood, as my father had fought in the war. He was 20 when the war. He was 19 when the war broke out in Britain in 1939. He became an army officer and then a RAF pilot. And he lost his younger brother, so my uncle John, who was in the Navy in 1944, and that's why when I was born, he gave me the name John. He named me after his younger brother. So obviously, you know, I have a very direct relationship to the war in the sense that I bear the name of someone who died in that war. And as it happens, my uncle John, the one who died in what are known as the Arctic convoys, which were convoys of the Royal Navy, which brought supplies and ammunition to Russia. He was on his way to the northern, to Murmansk when he died.
Well, this year's military parade through Red Square was the biggest ever, and the festivities certainly haven't stopped there. I must say, though, seeing the attack helicopters going over, the T-50 Sukhoi super stealth fighter jet, the display of military muscle was astonishing. Though the spectacle does not end, it did not end earlier today, it carries on all throughout the day, culminating tonight with a grand fireworks display right over the Kremlin. Though, of course, this is also a time to think back to that day 70 years ago, when people were simply overjoyed to understand that the war had finally come to an end.
Великая Отечественная война, которую вел советский народ против немецко-фашистских захватчиков, победоносно завершилась.
Well, during the Red Square parade, one of the most spectacular parts for the crowds looking on, of course, that of the air show.
отправляется бомбардировщик Ту-160. Производится заправка пары бомбардировщиков Су-34.
Just a remarkable display of Russian military might there, whether you're talking about the S-300, the S-400 as well, that some people refer to the S-400 as a knight on the global chessboard. Of course, we had the major tanks, the unveiling of the Armata. I tried to get down to have a front row seat for the parade. My credentials, I couldn't get them sorted in time because security was very tight. However, one of my colleagues did get his credentials sorted out in time. I'm very jealous. Neil Harvey, one of the very lucky few, down on the front line in Red Square.
It's just got louder and louder. Red Square is rumbling, and I feel like we've just been taken back 70 years into the past. There they are, the T-34 tanks that really did save the Soviet Union's bacon in many ways. The Soviet Union mass-produced them. Thousands of them were sent out wave after wave, and they played a key role in securing victory. Absolutely deafening here. I've been absolutely deafening. I can't hear a thing from the studio. It's also just getting that little bit louder because of this. You've just gone through now. We had the first of the aerial display. It was a Tupolev Tu-160, one of the White Swans, a supersonic bomber. Wow, that is big and that is loud. And now we've got the attack helicopters coming through. These are Kamovs, one of the new additions to the Russian Air Force. More wave on wave of attack helicopters coming through. We're going to see all the latest weaponry that we have in Russia.
Yeah, poor artisan Neil Harvey there, who is now officially deaf, but I'm sure he'll say it was worth it. Just before the parade kicked off right here in Moscow, Russia's President Vladimir Putin delivering a speech, making a very poignant message, calling on everyone to remember, especially today, the lessons of the past.
Today, 70 years later, history calls again to our wisdom and vigilance. We must not forget that the ideas of racial supremacy and exclusiveness had provoked the bloodiest war ever. In the last decades, the basic principles of international cooperation have come to be increasingly ignored. These are the principles that have been hard-won by mankind as a result of the ordeal of the war. We saw attempts to establish a unipolar world. We see the strong-arm bloc mentality gaining momentum. All that undermines sustainable global development.
And celebrations are also ongoing today in former Soviet republics. Of course, it was a joint Soviet army made up of soldiers from across the Union that ultimately defeated Hitler with the Allies 70 years ago. However, the holiday was undermined for some Ukrainian veterans by a recent law banning the display of communist symbols, including the iconic red banners associated with that of victory. Now, as celebrations were kicking off here in Moscow, the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko wrote on his Twitter feed that Ukraine's insurgent army, headed by radical nationalist leader Stepan Bandera, also played a role in the defeat of Nazism. He claimed that back then it already viewed Ukraine as an independent country. Well, the Ukrainian parliament recently passed a law honoring the organization, which was in fact a military wing of a Ukrainian nationalist organization. During the Great Patriotic War, its members fought against Soviet guerrillas in Ukraine. The Ukrainian insurgent army is actually accused of massacring 35,000 Poles in Volhynia that had fallen under Nazi control after the 1939 invasion of Poland. And its fighters were notorious for their cooperation with SS divisions. However, now Ukraine's president insists they were instrumental in the defeat of fascism. Let's discuss this now. We can cross live to Alexander Mercouris, the international affairs editor for Russia Insider, joining us on this very special day as we mark 70 years now since V-Day. Good to see you today, Alexander. What are your views on what the Ukrainian president had to say, also the timing of it?
Well, first of all, on the views themselves, let us be absolutely clear that Stepan Bandera never fought the Germans, never fought to achieve Ukrainian independence against the Germans. He did fight the Soviet Union. He was allied with the Germans. He was a collaborator with the Germans. As you absolutely correctly said shortly before, the defeat of Nazi Germany was a united effort of all of the Soviet people and of all the Soviet republics, including, of course, Ukraine. By saying this thing today, Mr. Poroshenko dishonors the memory of those who fought against Nazism.
Alexander, just while I have you here, I want to just play a soundbite for you because the Ukrainian Prime Minister has also made a certain comment on German television. Let's play that now. Have a close listen to this.
All of us still clearly remember the Soviet invasion of Ukraine and Germany.
Do you think that was said intentionally, or was it just perhaps a slip of the tongue?
No, I'm afraid I think it was said intentionally. The reason I say that is because Mr. Yatsenyuk has said so many things like this, and this is becoming increasingly the viewpoint of the present Ukrainian government and of its supporters. I am quite sure, though, that it is not the majority view within Ukraine itself. We saw today how many hundreds of thousands of people in Russia were holding up on Red Square pictures of their forefathers who fought in the war against the Nazis. And the same is true in Ukraine. And that memory is far too strong to be wiped out by the kind of things that Mr. Poroshenko and Mr. Yatsenyuk are saying.
Alexander Mercouris, International Affairs Editor for Russia Insider, joining us live here for our special coverage of the 70th anniversary of V-Day. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, one of the most important milestones in modern history. It's a great but also a solemn holiday we're marking today here on RT International. 70 years since Nazism was defeated, of course paying tribute to those who fought in the Great War to make it happen. We will continue our special coverage throughout the night here from our special studio in downtown Moscow. For the meantime, back to the RT News Centre with Katie Pilbeam.
Thank you very much, Rory. Indeed, we're going to be getting back to you in about 45 minutes or so looking forward to that very much, though. In the meantime, we've got plenty more news coming up after a very short break. Hello there, welcome back to RT International. Well, after a surprise victory in Thursday's general election, David Cameron is spending the weekend putting together the UK's next government. Well, that's likely to be one of the easier tasks facing the Conservative Prime Minister over the next 5 years, as Polly Boyko reports.
It was an electoral feast. On the table, a buffet, multi-party democracy, rainbow coalitions, a predicted hung parliament, and even talk of another election for dessert in several months' time. But the voting public's taste went against what the polls and the media were predicting. The UK opted for a full serving of Conservative government. So what's on the menu for David Cameron's second course? There are two major issues which could turn his next 5 years here in Downing Street into a bed of nails. One is that in-out EU referendum, which he's promised to deliver by 2017. And the second is the threat of another potential referendum, this time north of the border, where the Scottish National Party has won a landslide victory by taking 56 seats. SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon had called last year's referendum on Scottish independence a once-in-a-generation event. But the SNP's since said that a change in material circumstances could make them push for independence again. And this could provide the perfect excuse.
We will deliver that in-out referendum on our future in Europe.
Those material conditions have arrived. Scotland is a pro-EU country by and large. So I believe now, because of those things, that we are looking at a second referendum on Scottish independence.
So could a renegade Scotland be hanging by a thread within a union whose leader is threatening to pull out of the EU?
This time he must deliver that pledge, or he would just face an absolute storm from his own backbenchers and from the public. He's promised this referendum. He now must deliver. He's really boxed himself into a corner.
David Cameron may have won a slight majority in Parliament, but Conservative blue mainly extends through rural England. Major cities are broadly Labour, while the SNP's coloured Scotland yellow.
We now live in the disunited kingdom.
Yes.
Alex Salmond lost the battle, but he won the war because of the concessions they gave. Tonight, that's absolutely been confirmed. As quickly as possible, I'm afraid, even though I believe in the union, we're going to have to go to a referendum and probably let them go.
But got the north-south divide too, John.
No time to celebrate then for this newly elected Prime Minister, charged with leading a country whose politics are becoming increasingly fragmented.
As we conduct this vital work, we must ensure that we bring our country together. We will govern as a party of one nation, one united kingdom.
The biggest challenge, not just keeping his promises, but also the nation as one. Polly Boyko, RT, London.
The US passport is losing its appeal. The number of Americans giving up their citizenship has actually hit an all-time high. Well, whether it's to escape the US laws that force citizens to pay tax even when they're living abroad or for other reasons, over 1,300 people have waved goodbye to Uncle Sam since the beginning of the year.
I decided that I would renounce my U.S. citizenship in my early 20s. I remember it very vividly. I was in a class in San Diego City College. I was taking a class, American History, from a black perspective. And this was in the period where I started to awaken to all the lies that are told to Americans.
That was activist Ken O'Keefe. He's one of the many people who's uploaded a video onto YouTube explaining why he's turning his back on the Star-Spangled Banner. The US authorities do not look kindly, though, on those ditching the country and have increased the cost of doing so by 400%. Well, there were all sorts of people saying adios to America. The Mayor of London was born in New York and has actually both a British and American passport. He's calling the US tax policies outrageous and plans to get rid of his citizenship. We discussed the tax issue with Glenn Roberts, who wrote actually a guide for would-be expats on this.
To file now with two different agencies a report of all of your different bank accounts outside the United States. If you don't file those or file it wrong, the penalties can be up to 50%. So if you had $100,000 in a bank and you didn't file those forms for 3 years, the penalty could potentially be $150,000. I'd always had conflict with the United States over our being taught that it was a very free country and we had all kind of liberties. And then the examples set by the United States government, particularly with respect to spying and civil rights and human rights, was to the contrary. And really the United States is a bully internationally and to the people of the United States. And it came to me that I just didn't want to be a part of that. I didn't want to support it financially. I didn't want to support it morally.
Up next, we join enthusiasts searching former battlefields to find unmarked graves of some of those 6 million Soviet soldiers who went missing in World War II.